Welcome to this latest edition of Election Science Office Hours, our webinar and podcast that's hosted by the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy here at Caltech and moderated by me, Michael Alvarez. You can find our archive that now has over 24 episodes, including actually one that's got Christian in it already, available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And they're all listed on our Caltech Election Integrity Project page at protectingtheelection.us. If you're not already, please be sure to follow the Lynn Center on social media for all the latest updates on our elections and democracy work and all the projects of the Lynn Center here at Caltech. We're on LinkedIn, X, and Blue Sky. And certainly, please follow Christian as well. He's gonna, I know he's been posting very actively, and he's got a lot of cool material that he's been talking about on social media. So today's our special post-election recap. Both Christian and I have been up late reading the tea leaves. And so we're excited to talk today about what happened yesterday. And it's really exciting to have Christian here. He's a longtime colleague and friend of mine, just across the way here at USC. Kind of also a neighbor, because we live in kind of pretty much the same neighborhood. So whenever you post on social media the view of the palm trees, I'm like, okay, looking from the backyard, where can I see that? So in any case, Christian is a fantastic political scientist. He's one of their most prolific social scientists on their faculty. His research strengths are in American democracy, studying the kind of intersection between Congress representation and elections. He's actually really become an important figure here in California politics and national politics. He collaborates with public officials, students, and academics in his research and teaching. He's frequently consulted by advocacy organizations, state and local governments, and policymakers for his expertise on race, election reform, and redistricting. He's authored over 60 articles in the prominent journals of our profession, including the American Political Science Review, and has authored the award-winning book, Congress in Black and White, which, if you haven't read it, is a really fantastic book. And I'm hoping that maybe at some point you'll be updating that book, because it's a really fantastic book. In that book, he argues that race and redistricting are really crucial to understanding how Congress makes its decisions, and I'm absolutely correct. Christian's the director of the Democracy and Fair Elections Lab at USC, where students learn methods for redistricting and statistical analysis of elections. So, Christian, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a fun time to be on.
Thank you. Again, thank you for joining me the sort of morning after. I don't think people realize that for people like you and I who study elections, just like, how hard it is to kind of get going on the Wednesday morning after a big election. And I think, yesterday's elections, not only here in California, but, across the nation, are turning out to be, I think, much more important than I think a lot of people were really thinking before this election. So we got a lot to talk about today. First off, what were you doing yesterday on Election Day?
So I started the day by working on a research paper unrelated to the current elections, and like a paper that's based on some older data, and that was nice to get done. And then I and then ended up following a lot of the elections, and ended up doing some election coverage with one of the local channels last night, and several public officials and other professors and experts were there, and that was a lot of fun.
Which channel were you on?
I was on the Spectrum One cable channel.
Do you know if they archive those online somewhere?
I think they're archives. Yeah, you can probably go back and watch that.
Well, you should dig them up and put them on social. Because I missed that, because I was actually, I spent most of the day with students and others, and Raquel, actually, our postdoc, out in the field in the San Gabriel Valley area, just watching polling place operations in the vote centers here in LA County, which was actually fascinating. Actually, at some point, maybe in the next year, if you want to join us, it'd be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, that would be fun. I'd love to do that observation of the polling places.
Yeah, we learn a lot. I mean, in some of the stuff that happened yesterday, you learn a lot, obviously, about how the operations work, but it's really exciting. Yesterday was really much more exciting than I thought, because, as the day wore on, I sort of expected a relatively sleepy election day because, here in LA County, people either voted by mail already or they had access to vote centers. I voted on Sunday with my wife at the Rose Bowl Pavilion. Um, and it was really shocking. We got to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and we started to see lines forming. It got to be 4 o'clock in the late afternoon, and we were down in Highland Park at the library there that's down on Figueroa, right by York. And there was a
Mhm.
line of at least 120 people there waiting to vote.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, really surprising and really, really shocking to me. So, but we'll
You
come
know,
back.
I had the same feeling just in some of the places I observed that I was driving by, and even some of the coverage, like massive lines in Riverside to vote last night before the polls closed, and not what I would expect in a one-off ballot proposition election, more like a presidential election.
In the energy and electricity, this is the thing, just like when I walked back and forth down those lines yesterday. People, a lot of times people are, when they're waiting in line, they're kind of cranky and they don't want to be there. But it was like people seemed to be excited to be there. And it just was a lot of energy and enthusiasm, at least in the lines that we saw in LA County. So let's start at a high level because a lot happened nationally. And I really do want to start there and then kind of burrow deeply into kind of where Prop 50 fits into all this. So, originally, I actually, again, thought that we'd still kind of not know what the election results would be nationally. But, in New York City, in the mayor's race, Virginia, New Jersey, and Georgia, as you pointed out to me earlier in email today, things I think are pretty clear at this point. So looking at those races, what do you think this means for kind of how do we evaluate the, say, quote unquote temperature of the electorate, as we kind of close out 2025?
Yeah, I mean the top lines are just that the temperature seems to be pretty pro-Democrat in this particular set of special elections, and in some ways that's not surprising because Virginia leans Democrat, New Jersey leans Democrat. Both of those states, the Democrats won the governorship. I think a little surprising, the attorney general in Virginia, who's a Democrat who had a scandal, ended up winning fairly easily. And then in California, Prop 50, I'm not surprised that it won, but I'm really surprised it won by the margin that is coming in now. There's still a lot to count, but basically Newsom, that counts as a victory for Newsom, two Democrats at the top of the ticket in New Jersey and Virginia. The Virginia Assembly, the Democrats picked up a ton of seats in some legislative districts that I think are pretty swingish and maybe even like, in a different year would have definitely voted for Republicans. And then the New York mayor's race, I don't know as much about because I don't follow it very much. I'll follow it when we follow the LA mayor's race with the level of intensity we follow the New York mayor's race nationally. But that one was an interesting one because of Mamdani. I was a little surprised Cuomo did as well as he did actually, even though he lost. But I think in general, top line is Democrats did well. And then my question is that because of turnout differential? Are Republicans just only motivated when Trump is on the ballot? Are Republicans not, turning out and Democrats are? Or is it some of the people who voted for Trump in 2024 and other Republican candidates are shifting back? And then you mentioned the Georgia election. The Georgia election to me was really interesting. It's below the radar. It's very small kind of election people don't follow, but there are public service commissioner elections, which were held by Republican incumbents that the Democrats won. In one of the districts is really surprising because it's fairly rural parts of Georgia going up to the Atlanta suburbs like Gwinnett County, and the Democrat won pretty easily. And that's to me, that's another data point that Georgia is shifting, continues to be a swing state, and in
Right.
some ways is surprisingly voting for Democrats this year.
And that was not one that I was following. Do you happen to know what the sort of issues were in that race or what the candidates were talking about?
So I don't know what were the main things that were discussed, but typically that public service commission, it's got five districts in the state. Typically Republicans win because the state's been historically Republican for the last couple of decades, and then two of the Republican incumbents lost to Democrats. So to me, it just shows sort of the deepening partisanship that is
Right.
drilling down to local smaller office. It's not a local office, but it's a state office, but with local districts.
Mhm.
Um, it's just surprising in some ways to see things trickle down that much.
Yeah, the increasing partisanship of these races is really fascinating to follow. Now, do you think that I mean that is sort of one of the unifying threads here, right, across all these races that we were just talking about. Do you think it is more about partisanship as we're kind of ending 2025, or um is it more about what they were talking about? Because again, I didn't follow Mondani that closely either, but again, the sort of his candidacy as a democratic socialist and really focusing deeply on affordability and real pocketbook issues in some ways is kind of similar to what, and again, I didn't focus a lot on Virginia either, but what I understand a lot of the issues were there because Virginia's a state that has been really heavily affected by, a lot of the Trump administration policies. So do you think it's pocketbooky kind of stuff, or do you think it's more about just we're really deeply partisan today?
I think it's a combination. I think some of it's pocketbook, right? The government shutdown, the impact on SNAP benefits. There's an airplane crash yesterday, right? There's things that people are paying attention to that are not good, right?
Mhm.
Sort of regardless of your partisanship. And so anytime, the research shows anytime the economy or other things are going poorly, people will blame the party in power. Trump is the president, he's a Republican, Congress is controlled by Republicans. So in some ways, this is just a natural, people aren't feeling good about the shape of the economy and other things too. So the out party's winning. To me, like how much the out party's winning by the margins was
Mhm.
surprising. And so that also suggests to me a little bit of partisanship where Democrats
Yeah.
are maybe more motivated to participate. And it's the perennial question, was this driven by Democrats turning out because these are, effectively odd year elections, or was this like truly people responding to the state of the economy? It's probably a little bit of both, is at the end of the day, given the margins.
The other factor too is President Trump. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, but recently he said something interesting on social media that, from his perspective, the election was about two things: the fact that he wasn't on the ballot and the government shutdown. So do you think again a kind of a unifying thread here is that maybe this was largely a referendum on President Trump?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think he was technically on the ballot in terms of how it was framed by a lot of the Democratic candidates, and how Newsom framed Prop 50. I think that he technically wasn't on the ballot, of course, but I think it was a response to him. And, these are states, especially California, but also Virginia and New Jersey. These are states that lean or are solidly Democratic. And so, Trump is not popular and he's less popular than he was even a few months ago. So in some ways, it is a referendum on Trump. But I'd be a little nervous, to be a Republican in a swing state running for Senate or in some of the competitive House districts in 2026, given these results. But also, that's a year from now, and so this may only help us figure out what's going on next so much. But these are some tea leaves that I think this is probably a bit of a referendum on Trump. What we saw yesterday.
Well, I think that's got to be in some ways the case here in California, because obviously that was really central to a lot of the campaign messaging about yes on 50, especially what we were seeing in the kind of final weeks on TV coming from Tom Steyer and also coming from Governor Newsom and the campaign advertising that they were doing. Um, what do you think about how this Prop 50, how does it fit into this kind of national context? So if the national context is about the economy, maybe a referendum on Trump, maybe a little bit to do with partisan polarization, how does Prop 50 fit into this national story about what's going on in American politics as we close out 2025?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's different than people running for governor in Virginia and New Jersey because it's a ballot proposition and it's a
Mhm.
ballot proposition during a special election. But I think it fits the narrative of what happened yesterday quite a bit. This is a ballot proposition to pause the Independent Redistricting Commission, which has been very popular in the state for 3 elections. I figured it would probably pass given the framing as anti-Trump, and Trump's only, his approval rating in California right now is about 36%. So
Mhm.
that's not surprising. But the fact that it's winning, I think it's 63 right now, 64, that'll go up or down a little bit as more ballots come in. That exceeds the Newsom recall of 62. That Newsom only got 56% of the vote in his reelection, or 57. Harris got 58.
Mhm.
That's really surprising to me and suggests there's something going on that anything framed as anti-Trump and that is very partisan is really moving California voters, and differently than we saw in 2024. We saw some shifts in the electorate marginally from Democrats to Republicans in California at the statewide level. And then in this election, it's like you presumably even some independents were persuaded to vote for Prop 50, not just Democratic turnout, and that's surprising to me. So I think it's part of what's going on. I mean, California has been in the crosshairs of the Trump administration, right, with the immigration enforcement. Not far from where I live, there have been a lot of immigration sweeps, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen the same thing, and it's affecting people on the ground. And people, I think that may have been part of what's driving this. That was certainly Newsom's message, and so I think it's part of the national thing. Like one of the worst things for independent redistricting commissions was actually probably Trump in California and Trump wading into this redistricting battle.
Yeah, and I appreciate the caution, right? We do have to be a little cautious about saying too much right now until we start to see more data. But it is really amazing to see what that margin on Prop 50 is right now. We were chatting beforehand. I got home after poll watching last night, and I was hoping to watch the Duke Texas game before the polls closed. You're a Duke fan as well. But it was nearly immediate. I think it was called right as polls closed. And it's passing right now by a really wide margin, wider as you point out than maybe overperforming, right? How some of the Democratic candidates statewide have done recently. And it's too early to say what turnout is here too, but again, I was blown away by turnout yesterday afternoon. Turnout may have been, Newsom said something in his press conference or his speech last night that turnout in this special election may have been had historic levels for a special election. So what does passage of Prop 50 mean here in California?
Yeah, I mean, immediately, it's simply so there are three parts of the ballot initiative. One was an endorsement of national redistricting reform. It's more of an expressive endorsement, and then the map that was passed by the Independent Commission in 2021 is put aside, and the new map that was on the ballot. So in our mailbox, we got a map. Like when the voter guide came in, we got a map in the mail. That map has been passed and will now be used in the 2026 elections. And then there's also initially the proposition said it would happen only if Texas engaged in Republican gerrymandering, and then they did and said this Democratic gerrymander it will go into effect. So immediately the proponents of it have talked about how this is a big partisan gerrymander in response to Texas. Texas drew 5 seats that will probably vote for Republicans in 2026. So this new map that passed will now have about 5 more Democratic seats than before, and is getting rid of seats that are held by Republican incumbents right now. In some ways, it doesn't change the map a lot. A lot of the commission's map is the same in much of the Bay Area, a lot of Los Angeles, other parts of the state, Central Coast. The district in the Central Valley that Ken McCarthy used to hold is almost identical or is exactly the same. So a lot of the old map is the same. So for many voters in the state, they will probably still have the same representative, and the map is using the independent commission's work. The big changes are in really about 5 districts. It was like a surgical change to the map, where 2 districts in Northern California, far north near the Oregon and Nevada border, Sacramento, Lake Tahoe area is another district, Central Valley District in Bakersfield, and then a district in Riverside County and a district in San Diego County. Those have been changed pretty dramatically to be much more Democratic. And we can talk about some of those changes because I think the voters in those areas will be seeing really different candidates running for office this time.
Yeah, well, since we're there now, you want to share that map that you've got, and we can talk about some of these changes.
Yeah, so I just anyone who can see this, the assembly, when they put this on the ballot, put the map up on their website. So if people want to check this out, they can go to the website to see the map. But let me share, and I'll probably start in Southern California just because that's where we live. So that's the that's the
Well, a
let's
lot of the
yeah
changes are really in Southern California, right?
yeah exactly.
5 really important changes that you've outlined.
Yeah, and so this you can see in the map here. This is going really from like Santa Barbara down to San Diego, and then LA here, where there are quite a few districts because of the population equality. One of the biggest changes is this district right here. It's the 48th district. This is represented by Republican Darrell Issa right now.
Mhm.
He previously or right now his current district is eastern San Diego County, and some of the cities that are kind of on the interior of San Diego County is a pretty Republican district. And what's happened is his district has now moved up from northern San Diego County cities like Vista up
Mhm.
to Temecula. There's a freeway, and a lot of people from San Diego who've been priced out of San Diego are moving into Riverside County. So going from northern San Diego County to Temecula all the way to Palm Springs. And so this transportation corridor between Palm Springs, Temecula, and San Diego is this district. A lot of this district is the Anza Borrego deserts, and not that many people live there. But this is now basically gone from a very Republican district to a Democratic district. And it's a lean Democratic district. It's, probably about 4 points Democrat, depending on the election you look at. So Issa might run here still and could be formidable. He's very wealthy, and he has a war chest that he could rely on. But he also might decide not to. A bunch of Democrats have announced they're running in this district. Some from Palm Springs, some from San Diego. I haven't really followed a lot precisely exactly who might be running, but I was reading about that a few days ago if the map passed. And so this is a big change. This one's going to be pretty significant. And then this area of Palm Springs is where Ken Calvert, also a Republican, most senior Republican representative in California, used to represent. And his district has moved over here to Los Angeles. It's one of these districts over here. And the district in LA that his district has been moved over to is extremely Democratic, and it was drawn to be a Democratic gerrymander by the California Democrats. And like he's not going to run in a Democratic district in Los Angeles. And
Not
so
going to stop you for a
yeah,
sec.
yeah, sure.
That's the district that's orange, right?
I think so, yes.
It's kind of orange. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's good. That's effectively an open seat Democratic district that's been drawn to elect a Democrat, and then Calvert's district 41 had been over here in Riverside County, and now was put into the district with Darrell Issa. And so Calvert has to decide: does he run against Issa? Does he run against Young Kim, also a Republican? My hunch would be that Calvert would probably run against Young Kim in this new map, and we'd have an incumbent versus incumbent election. Darrell Issa might choose to also run in that district. It's one of the 4 Republican districts in this new Democratic gerrymandered map. And so the Republican incumbents may be making some strategic choices that, as a political scientist, we don't see that much. We see after redistricting, incumbents run against each other, but we don't usually see 3 incumbents potentially run against each other. So that'd be something interesting to study, to do a survey in that district if all 3 of them run.
And they have to run in the top 2 primary first, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there'd be some real incentives for them to think strategically about how to position themselves in a very Republican district, but to make it to the general. And it'd probably be 2 Republicans in the general election.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would be probably a Republican incumbent on a Republican incumbent in that scenario you outlined. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating one to watch. What about some of the other ones?
Yeah, so we've got the 48th and the 41st. Those have changed. A couple other ones are, if you go to the center of the state, this green district here is currently represented by David Valadao. It's in the Central Valley, includes Bakersfield. This one, the shape hasn't changed a ton, but it's actually changed a lot in terms of its partisanship. So this district has gone up quite a bit Democratic compared to the underlying map that the commission passed. So again, it's another one. David Valadao is a Republican. He's tended to win in a district that has been lean Democratic already, and so he might be able to survive here because he's an unusual Republican. But it's a very Democratic district, and there are 2 Democrats who've announced against him. One is currently a state legislator who actually opposed the map. So on the vote, she either abstained or did not, or voted no on the map, interestingly. And then another candidate who's run a little bit more to the left. And so this district will potentially see a new Democrat win. And the question is, like, which Democrat? And it's going to be pretty competitive. 2 Democrats and Valadao, presuming that Valadao runs again. And so that'll be an interesting election to watch in 2026.
So how did they make this so much more democratic without making major changes to this district?
So I don't know. I don't know exactly. I was just when you look at the shape, if you look at the shape of the old district, it shifts some. I don't remember precisely the differences without seeing the other map.
Yeah, it
Like
does look pretty
I think
similar.
this area might be new, but I'm not sure. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting one to watch.
Yeah. And then another one is right here. Um, this pink one. And so this is currently represented by Kevin Kiley. He's been one of the most outspoken voices since Prop 50 was proposed in favor of redistricting reform. And he represents this district. Well, he will be in this new district. The district previously included parts of Sacramento suburbs, which are down here, Lake Tahoe area, which is over here, and then went down into this relatively low population rural area on the border with Nevada. And then that part's been taken out. And it's now much more Sacramento suburbs and Lake Tahoe. So it's a little bit more Democratic. He may not run here because it's, this is probably it's another one of those Democratic gerrymandered seats that the California Democrats created. So this probably is not something he'll want to run in, but the Prop 50 caused him to become a real redistricting reformer. I don't recall him being on the discussing reform that much until Prop 50 arose. But he's become a vocal proponent of reform. And so one thing that I'll be watching, thinking about it from a reform perspective, in addition to the partisan implications, he might decide to move down here and run in this district, which is very Republican, against another incumbent. And if Kiley wins, there'll be one Republican in the House of Representatives who has sponsored a bill to ban mid-decade redistricting, other than for legal reasons. And so, the from a reform perspective, these partisan gerrymandered maps are kind of depressing, but they also activate legislators who haven't previously been reformers to become reformers, right? So, but the thing is, those people usually lose because they're targeted. And so, but Kiley's district is here, and this one has a big change, and a Democrat will pretty likely win. And then the fifth district is really these two here in green and orange, going to the Oregon border and the Nevada border. So this district now goes down to Marin County, where a lot of Democrats live, takes in some coastal areas where Democrats live. And then this district also in orange takes in some Democrats, like in wine country, Napa, Sonoma area, more populated down here. And so this previously been one Democratic leaning district and one Republican leaning district. Doug LaMalfa represents the Republican leaning district. And then these districts are now very Democratic. And so it's going to be hard to see a Republican winning in either of these two outside of a Republican wave year. And so this one is again, another Democratic gerrymander, like sort of surgically targeting the northern part of the state, this Lake Tahoe area. But then some other districts are pretty much identical, like this one in Santa Barbara to what was already there, this one in Monterey, like a lot of what the commission had done. This district here is almost identical in the Salinas Valley to what the commission drew. But we can see like big differences in the northern part of the state, big differences in Riverside County and San Diego County.
So if we combine what we were talking about earlier, which is like, what does this mean for 2026? This election seems to be a pretty strong Democratic swing in 2025 here, right? Very partisan, referendum on Trump potentially, referendum on the state of the economy and pocketbook issues, and that map. So for our congressional delegation in California, obviously they designed that map to try to swing 5 districts, right? Do you think that's what's going to happen? That Democrats will net 5? Do you think maybe they'll net more or net fewer? I mean, what do you think might happen in terms of where this might all end up about a year from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a strong Democratic year, like we saw in 2018 when Trump's first term was there, my guess is the Democrats will win all 5 of those districts we just talked about. I do think that the 48th district with Isa and then Valadeo in the Central Valley, those two will probably be a lot more competitive, just because Valadeo has been a very competitive Republican who's able to win in Democratic friendly territory, and then Isa's personally wealthy and could spend some of his own resources to try to win in 48. And that district is a lean Democratic district, not a super extensive Democratic district. And so I would say the floor is probably 3 Democratic pickups and then up to 5 in a wave year.
popping away here. And so the candidate filings is just weeks off. The June primary is just a couple of months off. We also both of us studied the top two primary. We've done some work on it together. I think this is also going to create, as we've mentioned briefly, some just fascinating dynamics in the primary before we even get to the general election. Do you think that this map here in California is going to force the Republicans to use a lot more resources in the primary? Again, if you got three Republicans running against each other in that district, than they might have otherwise. I mean, resources in some sense are zero sum. So if they're having to commit a lot more resources in the primaries to fight some of these races, do you think that's going to force them to commit resources that might have been used elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean that's the question, and that's really this partisan warfare and this partisan gerrymander in California that the Democrats did, the partisan gerrymander in Texas that the Republicans did. The resource question is almost meta. Like, how much do you spend on these redistricting battles right now to change a map versus like actually campaigning versus actually like spending money on a primary or a general election? And so what we're going to see here for the Republican Party is that there will be at least two incumbents probably run against each other, maybe three in Southern California. That's going to lead to a lot of resources. It's probably going to some Republicans are going to want to stand on the sidelines because they don't want to get involved in a Republican versus Republican battle, but there will be a lot of resources there that could be maybe devoted to other places. I do think those the Democrats, even though yes, this is a Democratic gerrymander, some of these are lean Democratic seats, so the Democrats will be also expending resources to hold seats that lean Democratic. In that the new Democratic 41st district, the 48th district that's now pretty Democratic. You might see a bunch of candidates running in those districts because especially if ISA doesn't run in 48. Same thing, Democrats will be devoting a lot of resources to primary elections with multiple candidates, and maybe not using them as much for the general. I do think that the national part of this is important too, right? I mean, I think the whole redistricting wars are kind of normatively depressing, but it's happening in part because the U.S. House is so close, right? It's about a 4-seat margin right now that the Republicans have. Every single seat could flip the House to the Democrats or could keep the Republicans in control. And so from a resource perspective on the party side, you see Republicans redrawing maps in other states. You see Democrats redrawing maps in California with the voters' consent, and that's because every seat actually matters. And so one thing we've heard a lot from, I think there are more political arguments from both Democrats and Republicans on Prop 50, was that this won't really matter, or yes, this will change everything, and it's probably not really either. Like, it does matter because it's a potential change of 5 seats for Democrats, but also it's potentially going to wash out and will wash out with Texas and other seats that have been gerrymandered for Republicans. But in the absence of I think if Texas hadn't done their map, I doubt California would have ever had a ballot proposition happening. And so in some ways, a lot of resources are being expended across the country to basically what will probably be like 3-seat gain for Republicans after Democrats and Republicans are done gerrymandering.
So you mentioned that you think this is normatively depressing. Can you elaborate a little bit? So what is the source of your normative depression?
Well, I mean, so the upside of the ballot proposition is it's an endorsement of national redistricting reform. I generally feel that independent commissions have been really useful for drawing maps that I think, think about take community of interest testimony seriously. Basically, there's a lot of things that I've written about where the commission process, I think, works really nicely. And so in that sense, like the sort of the movement away from reform is kind of depressing. And that's maybe more of a personal view than something like that's scholarly, but some of it is also based on scholarship. Voters tend to like, fair processes. Voters tend to like transparent processes. And so in that sense, it's normatively depressing. The other side of it is just like a resource question. It is a lot of resources being expended by the Democratic and the Republican parties to redraw their maps for what will be a net like change of 2, 3, 4 seats potentially. And so that's, in terms of like as a voter, sometimes it would be, you wonder if those resources could be allocated to something else. But it also makes sense, like rationally, like putting on my scholarly hat, parties are interested in trying to maximize their seats so that they can control Congress. And so what we're seeing makes a lot of sense from the perspective of both the Democratic and Republican parties.
Mm-hmm. So I was talking a couple of weeks ago on this same show with Jonathan Katz, and Jonathan and I speculated a little bit about what this means for the whole process of national independent redistricting nationally. Jonathan was pretty pessimistic. I guess I have to share his pessimism. So is that part of your normative depression here too, that you think that this is the sort of death knell, at least for the time being?
I wouldn't say that, because in politics lately, things change faster than you can ever
It's
guess.
true, right?
Like,
Yeah.
who knows what things will look like in 2030, right? Like 2030 could be completely different than 2025, different president, things like that. And so, but what I'm seeing is that this is probably going to encourage, I think both Democrats and Republicans in other states to do a lot of the same thing. Like, so Newsom mentioned like Colorado and Maryland doing Democratic gerrymanders. Republicans have already been doing Republican gerrymanders in Missouri, in potentially Indiana. Like, JD Vance has visited Indiana multiple times to try to convince their state legislature that's Republican to redraw maps. And so in that sense, I don't see anybody sort of sticking up for reform right now outside of a couple of voices. But also, like, ballot propositions and states with ballot propositions, reform can happen out of places you don't expect. So, Oklahoma right now has a top 2 ballot proposition moving forward. I've heard rumors about interesting electoral reforms in Colorado that might go on the ballot in the next year to 3 years. So, who knows what the landscape might look like in 2028. One thing where I think optimistically from a reformer perspective, I think it's unlikely to occur anytime soon, but this discussion in California, Texas, Missouri has really raised the national understanding of redistricting and gerrymandering in a way that I've never seen before. Like, I love to write about this stuff and then, present it to rooms of 3 to 10 people, right? Like, and then now it's like everyone wants to know about this. And so there is possibly a chance for some, national discussion and reform, depending on like what the next several years looks like, who's in control of Congress, who's the president, things like that. I'm not very confident of any sort of major national reform in the next 1 to 3 years, but you never know what could happen, right?
Yeah, you seem kind of cautiously optimistic. I mean, and so I want to ask you though about California specifically. Do you think there's any chance that the Prop 50 did have an endorsement of the Independent Commission in California and a promise to return to it, right? Do you think there's any chance that they may renege on that promise or try to renege on that promise?
I'm not sure. I doubt it. In the ballot language, it says that the commission comes back in 2030.
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, like 2030 is probably going to be a different landscape than we're in right now. And if the commission would be eliminated, it would have to be another ballot proposition, right? So it'd be another big ballot proposition fight. I was reading a Politico article that suggested that, eliminating the commission is really unpopular. So that, that's the kind of thing that would be, I think, unlikely to happen, but who knows, right? Like, if you asked me last April, no, not last April, if you asked me in April of 2025, will California be putting a map before voters, which I don't think has ever happened in U.S. history, and passing, I would say, yeah, that's not happening. So I don't want to be too definitive on anything, but I think it truly is a pause where there's 3 election cycles with this new, very democratic gerrymander, and then the commission comes back.
Yeah. No,
Oh, can I add one more thing on that too?
of course, yeah.
So I think it also matters. It also depends on the control of the U.S. House circa 2030.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now it's so narrow that everybody's trying to gain partisan advantage, Republicans and Democrats. And Eric Engstrom has written about this in the 1800s. Like, this did happen in the 1800s also, because the margins were so narrow in the U.S. House. And then all of a sudden the margins weren't that narrow. If one party basically picks up a lot of seats in the U.S. House, there's no incentive for parties to do these major overhauls of their redistricting process just to gain like 2 seats if one party is controlling the chamber by 40 seats, 50 seats. So I think it kind of depends also on the control of the U.S. House in 2030.
Yeah, the House and the presidency. I mean, we could be in a very different, scenario. We could also be in a very similar scenario. I mean, it's that to me, I mean, I don't know what the probabilities of those two things are, but that's kind of where I think folks who are a little bit concerned, right, about whether the independent commissions will come back are a little worried.
Yeah. Well, one other thing on that where I'm a little bit more optimistic. So there has been a real move to do local redistricting commissions that has popped up. It's been very big in California. There's, some places that have done it due to being forced to do so via, some advocacy work of Common Cause and other organizations convincing the legislature to pass local redistricting commissions. Other places have chosen to adopt them. So I do think the nationally, the redistricting is just completely partisan warfare. But at the local level, where often there's nonpartisan elections and there's other considerations, there seems to be a move still, at least in terms of maintaining existing redistricting commissions, if not expanding them.
Yeah. So since we were talking a little bit about, the politics of this in the next couple of years, um, and what this means in California, what do you think this means for Governor Newsom? He put a lot of energy into this. This became a personal crusade for him. We know he, I think, has aspirations to run for president. Do you think this has really kind of strengthened his potential as a presidential candidate in 2028?
Yeah, I think this has strengthened his candidacy a lot. It's very early, right? So you don't want to peak too early when you're running for president. Like Ron DeSantis, I think, was doing really well in the Republican
Forget that.
primary about 3 years out
Right.
for the last election, and he is not the president. So this the Newsom might want to worry about that. But I think this has elevated him a lot. I think he's been known in California, but even in California, his poll numbers have been
Hmm.
okay, and they're really high now. And
Right.
anecdotally, I was at a conference that you were at in St. Louis recently, and my Uber driver was a very politically attentive person and was just going on and on about Newsom and asking me, like, what do you know about Gavin Newsom? And not the place I would have expected people to be asking about Gavin Newsom, just out of the blue. And so, I mean, if you look at the data, his poll numbers have increased in the
Hmm.
presidential primary matchup numbers. People know who he is
Hmm.
nationally. He's been going to South Carolina. It wouldn't surprise me if he's going to go to one of those early states, New Hampshire, South Carolina, next week, next month, something like that. And so I think this has boosted him quite
Hmm.
a bit. And then I think it also might cause J.B. Pritzker,
Hmm.
governor of Illinois, Wes Moore, governor of Maryland, others to actually like think maybe I should be doing this redistricting thing too, so I can get a little bit of attention,
Hmm.
like Newsom is. But yeah, I think it's boosted his presidential ambitions quite a bit.
Hmm. Yeah, I thought one other just kind of California politics thing was interesting was the timing of Senator Padilla's announcement that he's not going to run for governor, which was just, right at the moment where, or right before the Prop 50 election, polling was coming out that it was passing considerably. Do you think that sends any signal about Newsom's intentions?
I don't know. I mean, to me, that just struck me as Alex Padilla decided he didn't want to run for governor, and I think a lot of people who know him wanted him to run for governor, but he just moved to Washington, and
Yeah.
maybe he's happy with being senator. Like to me, sometimes, I my guess is that that was a lot of wish casting from Sacramento people who maybe wanted him instead of some of the people who are in the front runners in the polls right now. And it's otherwise then now it's a pretty wide open race
Yeah.
for governor with many
Yeah.
people running.
Which we'll have to come back and talk about, as we get closer to the primary. Um, so we have one interesting question, and I think I know the answer to it. But let me just see what you think. Do you see that there are going to be lawsuits in California and Texas because of these partisan gerrymandering maneuvers?
If you know the answer, maybe you want to answer my
Yes.
yeah.
I think that's a
Um,
simple one. Yeah, and the answer is yes, I think, right?
yeah, I don't know. Lawsuits are common with redistricting, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, So one thing that we chatted about kind of briefly on email before this was that this is really clearly a partisan gerrymander because we're talking about partisan gerrymandering now, and others like Texas and Missouri, um, but in some of the other states, Indiana, New Hampshire, Illinois, maybe Virginia. There's kind of these interesting kind of political cross pressures that are occurring between a partisan gerrymander and incumbent protection gerrymanders, right? Um, so you said once that recently that one of the fascinating things that you know have seen is that California Democrats are willing to sacrifice some of these districts that are, you know, kind of compact and urban and kind of clearly in their camp and are really kind of willing to trade incumbent protection for party goals. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And you know, what does that mean here in this context of Prop 50?
Yeah, and I think this is something I'm going to be doing some research on as a political scientist. But in general, like in sort of the public imagination of redistricting, we usually think of fair maps and then like gerrymanders. But there's really two types of gerrymanders, at least two types. Incumbent protection and partisan. And those sometimes have cross pressures
Right.
where, you know, I think in a state like Indiana, the Republicans control the state government. They could redraw the maps if they wanted to, but there's a lot of hesitation from some Republican state legislators because there's two Democrats right now, and the rest of the members of Congress are Republicans. And yes, they could draw a gerrymander that would probably elect all Republicans or maybe all but one Republican, but then that was just going to make some of their incumbents a little less safe. And so some of those Republican incumbents in Indiana are probably like, I like my 80% Republican district. I like my 70% Republican district. And so in California, and then, you know, I'd say this is probably the case in some of the other places that are gerrymandering as well. They made the strategic partisan choice to
Mhm.
take down a district that's 70-80% Democrat because it's in an urban area, and in urban areas in California, those places vote Democrat, and then make it like 62 or 59. And you know, they're still Democratic districts and Democrats will probably win, but they're not as easy for the Democratic incumbents. And so the you know the idea that the Democrats in California decided to partisan gerrymander instead of, you know, get comfortable with the seats they did, I think is interesting. I mean, in some ways it's an independent redistricting commission, so maybe they were okay with moving some things relative to what the commission did, which I think would be more of a traditional fair map. But there are real cross pressures going on where if you see states that are like, yeah, we don't want to gerrymander, they might be doing noble things, but they also might just be preferring to run in the districts that they've gotten used to. And incumbents are used to running. And same thing in Illinois on the Democratic side. It's a Democratic map already. Democrats control the state. They could redraw the map and make it more Democratic, but it could potentially weaken just a little bit some of the surrounding Democratic seats. And so I think that's some of the hesitation that you see from some states that are one party that could gerrymander, but they probably would prefer to keep their incumbent seats. And then some of the states also, I mean, California used to be like this prior to its commission. The Republicans and the Democrats would actually kind of get together and draw an incumbent plan that protects both of them. And so that's something that I think, you know, we're seeing in Texas and California. Those states were willing to engage in partisan gerrymandering, even if it means their own members in the party might have just a little bit marginally less partisan districts.
Yeah, you know, I really hadn't put much thought to it, but I do think that what's been happening in Texas and California has really kind of highlighted that potential tension, right? And so, gosh, I'm really excited to see what you're going to do in terms of a research project on this. I've kept you here for almost an hour, and we could go on for at least another. I could at least go on for another couple of hours about Prop 50 because it was just it's a really historic moment in California, and I'm not entirely sure that folks have kind of woken up and realized the extent to which, you know, we really kind of made political history yesterday. So, is there anything we haven't talked about today that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean I could talk for hours about redistricting, but I should probably write more articles about redistricting in addition to talking.
Well, I know that, you know, pretty soon we're going to be switching topics and talking about the top two in the primaries as well.
Yeah,
All these fascinating things. And as you note, there's just so much change and uncertainty right now in American politics. It is a truly fascinating time to be someone who studies American politics and works closely with all these organizations and advocacy groups that are interested in thinking about change.
yeah.
So I'm jealous.
Yeah, well, no, thanks for having me. And it's sort of a it's a dismal time if you don't like partisan gerrymandering. But we have a lot to study as political scientists with all of this partisan gerrymandering that's going on in California, Texas, and beyond.
Great, and I'm looking forward to seeing that all that work. So thanks so much for being with me today, Christian, and I look forward to chatting with you in the very near future.
All right, bye, Mike.
Take care. Thank you.